Again, we're really looking at giving students timely feedback on how they are doing when they still have an opportunity to shift course. So again, it helps us monitor students, but also our instructional effectiveness by figuring out what the students did or didn't learn, what they can or cannot do, so we can modify our instruction and potentially go back and revisit or reteach content. Maybe the way we presented it wasn't quite right, or maybe we didn't spend enough time on something. Maybe we're spending too much time on something. This helps us be more effective in the classroom as well, whether that classroom's online or face-to-face. Some characteristics. Formative assessment can be formal or informal. It can be something where it's like show of hands, who understood this concept from the reading. Or it can be something more like a quiz or like an activity that you want students to do. They're generally low stakes. We're generally not putting a lot of course credit onto formative assessment because the goal is to provide feedback. It's about coaching. It's not about, awarding points. So sometimes formative assessment is completely ungraded. Sometimes it's graded on a completion basis. Other times it's just a few points toward a student's final grade because that's not the purpose here. We typically tend to emphasize qualitative feedback, telling the students how they can improve versus giving them a number or a score. That's not going to be helpful for performance purposes. We really focus on the process versus the result. How are students getting to the goals that we want them to accomplish for the course? Because they're not at the point we're ready to give them that final summative assessment that Julia is going to talk about in a few minutes. And finally, these assessments are criterion referenced. And what that means is that we're evaluating students based on a certain criteria for performance, not comparing them to each other. It's about the individual learner's process and what he or she needs to do to be more successful in your course, not about how they're doing relative to other students. Does this all make sense so far? Okay, great. So when we talk about formative assessment, this is really a team effort. It requires involvement by the instructor and the student, and it oftentimes can require involvement by peers. And these are all valuable ways for students to get feedback. Being reflexive and looking at their own learning process and thinking about their own strengths and weaknesses, getting feedback from peers, either formally or informally, and getting feedback from the instructor. So we all have an opportunity to be involved in this process, with students being resources for themselves and others, in addition to us being resources for the students. Right? Makes sense so far? So here's just some examples of formative assessments. You're probably familiar with some of these things. Self-evaluation and peer evaluation. In the previous session, we talked about rubrics. You heard from Michelle, who's sitting right here. Students can evaluate themselves and each other using those same rubrics you're going to use to evaluate them at the end of a project or at the end of a unit to get some feedback along the way. This is really powerful for the learning process because we learn a lot from teaching others. We learn a lot from seeing how other people approach things. So that's a really great way to engage students in the process. Journals and reflective writing are very commonly used in a lot of different courses. You can even use some more traditional things like comprehension quizzes. So very low stakes, but just to see if students understood the content. Maybe 2 or 3 quick questions over a reading, just to make sure they pulled out the main ideas, and then you can coach them on where they might need to go to refresh their knowledge if they didn't get something right. I really like things that are kind of qualitative and open-ended, so I really like minute papers or free writing, as well as muddiest point or exit tickets. So the idea here is to present students with an idea and just have them write without overthinking. So with a minute paper or free write, I might come in and say, what was the most interesting thing you learned from last night's reading? And I just have them write for a minute, time's up, they submit it, they get a point for completion. Not based on what they say, it's just getting them to stop and think. And that reflection process is really important because it helps with encoding, retention, and recall in terms of students' cognitive processing. Just getting them to slow down and think about what they're learning. The muddiest point is an example of this, but kind of doing it on the other end. As before students leave, saying, what was the most challenging or unclear thing about today's class? So that you as an instructor know if you need to go back. And if students say everything's good, or maybe you're finding students are consistently pointing out something that you could modify a little bit in your teaching. We've talked about polls and surveys. You can do those right in class, raise your hand, or do them online. Reading response papers, concept mapping, the think, pair, share that you did just a few minutes ago gave us some insight into your learning process and maybe helped you realize how much you do or don't know, or what you do or don't know about assessment. Would you agree? All right. So those are all examples. So my question for you as an e-learning instructional designer is there anything on this slide that you think could not be done in the online space? Yes, ma'am.
How would they do think, pair, share?
Think, pair, share. Okay, so here, just to give an example, I was hoping somebody would ask something so I could tell you something, so I'm glad you said that. You can utilize group features for online courses. For example, Blackboard has a groups feature where you can assign the students to work together. They have their own little mini Blackboard within Blackboard, their private discussion board, a private wiki space, a private email, where they can work virtually and then share those results out, perhaps through a discussion forum with the rest of the class or a public journal with the rest of the class. So it's kind of replicating the things you might do in your face-to-face class, but we just have to think about ways where we can let students do that virtually. So that would be an example of some asynchronous collaboration if students are working through some of those tools. But you can also, in Adobe Connect, which I know they use over in SIS, and Blackboard Collaborate in the new release that's about to come out, you can have breakout groups. So if you're doing a live online class, you can have the students break into smaller groups, and you as the instructor can visit those virtual rooms and provide coaching and then bring the class together to discuss. So it's definitely possible. It takes a little bit of extra effort and a little bit of technical know-how, but it can be done. Anything else you want to challenge me on? Can't be done? Yes.
In the student's mind, how do you clarify in the student's mind the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment?
Mm-hmm. I really encourage the students to think of these as opportunities for improvement and opportunities for reflection. Yeah.
I'm saying that they're getting a checklist. I did all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? One of the problems we have is some of my faculty give a lot of A's, partly because they're completing the checklist of things they have to do.
Yeah.
As opposed to evaluating the students against each other or against some competitive standard.
Mm-hmm.
So if they all meet the criterion, should everybody who meets the criterion get an A?
Mm-hmm.
And with grade inflation, at least my school is being challenged to not use that as the way of determining grades.
Yeah, I think formative assessment can help us kind of move away from that a little bit, because we can talk to students about evaluating their progress toward goals versus did they or didn't they, versus did they do it or not. So when I talk about, for example, giving a completion grade for a formative assessment, it's really about getting them to participate in the learning process. It's not necessarily about ticking the box, but I understand your point about how sometimes students may perceive it that way. And so the framing of those activities is really important. Did anyone have other ideas or suggestions about maybe how to couch those things for students? I know we have some assessments whizzes in the room.
One of the things that I do in one of my classes is I actually have them create an action plan at the end of the semester. So how are they going to take what they learned and the topics that we covered and the information and their desire to maybe know more than what we were able to cover over the semester, or to pinpoint an area within the discourse that they're more interested in exploring. So one of the final assignments in my courses is how do we take this need to learn more, this want to learn more, to create an action plan proposal. And I give them specific instructions for doing so, but it's something they can do, in person, they can do it online, but it has to be to me by the end of the semester. And it's one of those things that I think helps them formulate from a formative perspective what else they can do, and it gives me a chance to offer them up other ideas or resources in the community or in the literature that can help them further explore that if they choose to.
There was a really neat example in the previous session. Allison Thomas, who's in the college writing program, was here and shared a little bit with us about how she's using Google Docs with her students. And she's using Google Docs for formative assessment of having students do little pieces of their research and writing so she can coach them. But then by the end of the semester, they also have all this material that they themselves have generated that they can pull from for their final summative assessment. So it's kind of making that process transparent and showing students that all this stuff that we're doing to help us see if you're learning also has value to them as well. And I don't know if that really addresses your point.
It doesn't,
but
because a student thinks that I did well on all my formative assessments. Why did I only get a B?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Karen.
Well, I think that's why it's really important when you do any assessments, whether it be summative or formative, that there is clear criteria that you're explaining to the students for the kind of things that you're looking for. And so, for example, if a student gets a B plus is a perfectly, fine grade. But the question is, why did the student get a B plus as opposed to an A minus or A? And as a faculty member, if you're using rubrics that you can give back to the students, you can not only explain to the students using the rubric what the criteria is and the strengths and weaknesses, but then you can take that as a faculty member and say, were there any patterns in our students? Are there any things that consistently they were maybe having some more problems on than some other things? And also, are there other things that they can excel at? And I guess the other thing I would say is if students are consistently always getting A's for meeting the criteria, one of the things that we notice and I do the assessments or work with people who do assessments at the program level, maybe the criteria, maybe we're not setting high enough standards for our students. And it's an opportunity then to maybe be expecting more of our students. And so it's also a place, can we lift the bar a little bit? And because I know that students in general at the undergraduate level, this is just talking about in terms of what they're telling us on surveys, they want to be challenged, and they're not necessarily feeling like they're being challenged as much as they could be. So it gives us some leeway. So sorry.
Perfect. No, don't be sorry, because I think you answered the question better than I did. So thank you. Thank you.
I think, too, for the formative assessments, you can just make them worth a lot less points and then grade them to your expectation. I started doing that because I had the same situation where I was grading them light because it was a learning thing, but then it gave them a false impression of what I was going to expect in the end.
Yeah, great point. So, yes, Catherine.
One of the most valuable things I have ever done here at AU is take a CTRL course. Actually, Joy was one of the instructors on how to teach online course. And they emphasize put your grading rubric in your syllabus, which I've never done before. And that spelled out very clearly to the student that basically an A exceeds expectations, as opposed to a B or a B plus meets all the expectations. So if it's right in your syllabus, the students should be reading the syllabus, and that helps CYA for your grade at the end of the semester.
Thank you. All right.
So I just jumped up here.
Yeah, no.
I'm aware of our time, so I'm going to fly through the next few slides quickly, but I'm going to cover some information about summative assessments. So we talked about diagnostic and formative, and we'll see a chart later about kind of the main components of each of these kinds of assessments. Summative assessment is one of the methods of assessment you might be the most familiar with. Full disclosure, I'm not a faculty member, so you might be the experts here on this type of assessment, but it is the most widely used. It tends to be a very transactional method of assessment. It's very widely used in the U.S. and other Western countries, and essentially it measures performance against established standards to assess success. So testing by benchmarking. And some characteristics which I have up on the slide, they're very high stakes, so unlike formative. They have a high point value, and they tend to be quantitative versus qualitative. And the second one is that the questions for summative assessments tend to be right or wrong, and so the grading for them tends to be just as binary or kind of non-negotiable. So I'm going to bring up two examples of summative assessments, one of which is kind of more in the traditional vein, and the other is more kind of alternative or contemporary, but both of which can occur in the online space. So I work at American University as a staff member at the School of International Service, and I work specifically with students in the online Master of International Relations program. And that is a 2-year master's degree delivered entirely online in international relations. And our student body it's pretty unique. So they cover 14 different time zones. They do jobs, everything from being in the military to teaching ESL overseas, to working with disaster relief organizations. So our program needs to be pretty adaptive to their specific needs. One of the requirements, without going in too much detail, of the program is that they complete a macroeconomics coursework. And they can either take our 15-week online course for that, or they can try their hand at a placement exam. And if they pass the exam, they waive the requirement. So this is a screenshot of one of those online exams. We've taken the on-campus kind of study hall version and translated into the online space. This is using Adobe Connect, which is the software our program specifically uses. And students here have access to everything that they would have in the study hall, including the instructions for the exam, They can see each other face to face and hear each other. I'm there to proctor them. They have access to a chat box, and I'm counting down the time as they move through the exam. So this is an example of kind of one of the more traditional ways we do summative assessment in the online space. But some of the more creative ways, as we mentioned, can be anything from students providing video feedback to each other, or posting on a blog, or participating in games or interactive polls. And we'll get to some of those examples as well. One of the most important examples I wanted to mention here, and we just kind of covered some components of competency-based assessment. So this is one of the more kind of alternative or contemporary methods of summative assessment. It is essentially comparing student achievements to different outcomes rather than to specified competitive levels. And it's gained some more attention in recent years, but there's still some kind of contention around the method. The way it translates back into our topic is that the flipped classroom or the online space is really built for this type of assessment. When you know more about your students on the front end, when you can see how far they got in a specific...
Sorry about that.
That's okay. When you can see how far they got in a specific reading or when they tuned out of a video, you have more information about how competency-wise they are doing in a particular course or research area. And this helps us be more intentional about our assessments and our course designs in general. No matter online or in person, though, there are many ways to do summative assessments, and they are all great. You can always come talk to any one of us. Anyone who signed up for today's session in advance has access to the Blackboard course associated with it, where we've posted tons of different handouts and materials for you. If you signed up on the sheet just today, that's also fine. We can enroll you in the course and get you access to all those things. There's a whole host of lists, as Tara was mentioning, of the tools that we use for quizzing and also the resources we drew from today for our presentation. But just to wrap up, so this is the handout you got when you entered, and it kind of lays out all the basic key components of each of these 3 different types of assessments. We talked about how diagnostic assessment is assessment as learning, formative is assessment for learning, and summative is assessment of learning. So those are the basic 3 ways we tend to describe these forms. And I guess that's it. We had an ed tech map. Sure, is that in here?
Yeah, if you go forward, I think it's a couple more slides.
One more. There you go.
Here we go. Yeah. And I did want to show you this. So in a world of many, many different ed tech, it's difficult to make sense. So this is another reason we've given you a list of resources for you to draw from. Poll Everywhere is a great resource to use. So is Kahoot that we use today. You can experiment with these tools on your own and see which makes the most sense. The Online Learning Consortium is also a great resource for tools and information on the latest trends in online assessment, and we'd be glad to share others with you as well. But we're going to leave a few more minutes for questions if you have any for the 3 of us, and our contact information right here.
I just have a quick, I hope, technical question. How do you do something online across how many? 12 time zones?
Yeah, that is a great question. And our program is very unique in that it's entirely online, so they have the split between the asynchronous and the synchronous component. So we do have to take their time zones into account when we have that synchronous live session. We do have weekly meetings where students meet to discuss the course material they read and saw beforehand, but those are shortened. So they're 80 minutes. And they essentially, the idea is that in combination with the 80 minutes of reading that they would do before class, it would make up the 120 minutes on campus.
But do you try to do it with people, say, in Asia and then in other regions? Because
we actually have a faculty member teaching for us from Australia this semester, someone from Toronto, a variety of other international locations, and as Julia said, the students log on from 14 different time zones. So our classes are mostly offered in the evenings. We also have some weekend classes, and then a few that fall in the morning, early mornings during the week, to try and accommodate everyone's schedule.
On this technology page here, what resources is there for protecting academic integrity?
Great question. We talked a little bit about this at the earlier session. There are a couple of tools I can tell you about very briefly that are integrated with Blackboard. We do have Safe Assign, which helps to flag potential instances of plagiarism. We also have a new tool that we're using. We piloted it in the fall called Respondus. Respondus has a lockdown browser, so when a student is taking a test in an online environment, they cannot leave the testing environment, they cannot print, they cannot screen capture. It really keeps them in that space. They are, again, integrated with Blackboard, so you have to create your exam in Blackboard, but that's something I can help you with. Respondus also has a tool called Monitor, where you can actually make a web recording of the student taking the exam. It's a virtual proctor. And what it does is it flags anomalies. It's not saying this person's cheating or not cheating, but you as the instructor can go back and look at the recording and see if whatever was flagged was something of concern or not. Sometimes a family member walks past and it may flag it. Other times someone's coming in the room and talking to them about the test, and then you as the faculty member have the ability to do that. There's an advanced Blackboard session, I believe, later today where they may discuss some of those tools, or you're welcome to make an appointment with me and I'd be happy to work with you.
I have a question about, I teach online in the in the MBA program, so I do that same online. But our tests are sort of book, so they don't have to be monitored. But do you have students pushing back on having to come to a test at a specific session? Because we assign our test and give them 5 days to do it, and like I'll have students say, "Oh good, I'm traveling, so I'll sit down and take the test the day before or the day after or whatever."
Yeah.
But with the monitoring situation, they have to be there at that test-taking time.
They do, yeah.
And how do they feel about that?
We offer them pretty frequently, so twice a semester. And each cycle we have maybe 2 to 3 opportunities, usually in the morning or in the evening, so people who are overseas can also do them. But we've actually seen kind of the opposite, because we have now on-campus students who are taking the online exams with us, because it's more convenient. Because for them, they don't have to come to campus. So it's kind of viewed as a more convenient option rather than a less convenient.
Okay. But so then you have to be there to monitor multiple sections.
We do, yeah.
Okay.
So that's maybe 6 to 8 times a semester.
6 days. Okay, I gotcha.
And courses are different too. So the IC course that I teach in that program, we administer the test during the regularly scheduled 80-minute synchronous class time. So it's taken during one of those live sessions. Other faculty have designed theirs so that they have them open for 24 hours. So students have a 24-hour period to do it. It's a written essay assignment of sorts. So
are
they're
you sitting there as the monitor watching, or is it
during the
just recording?
80-minute live synchronous session that they're taking the exam in my classroom, in my Adobe Connect classroom? I am sitting there and I watch
But
them.
could you do one exam per 4 sections of the same class?
Yes.
So that, so that you're not every professor is sitting watching.
If you're using some of the tools I think that Joy mentioned, yes.
Another thing you can do too is there are different things you can do around exam design, and one of the other features of Blackboard is that you can pull questions from a pool so that students are getting different versions of the exam. You can also randomize the responses and randomize the order in which the questions appear on the exam, which really helps to deter cheating, particularly if students are in a computer lab together taking the test. They may look over, the person's not taking the same version of the test. And then there's some other things you can do too around assessment strategies in terms of rethinking how you evaluate students, doing more authentic kinds of assessment where students have to perform things that are unique to them. So it makes it very difficult for them to cheat. If you ever want to talk about that stuff, feel free to make an appointment with me. I'd love to chat with you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.